The Memory of Love, Chapter 29. Last night I dreamt of Julius, says Elias Cole. We were in some great airy space, like a railway station or a lecture room. It was one of those ever-changing spaces that occur in dreams. There, among the gathering of people, I was sure it was him, Julius. Yet what was he doing here? I tried to elbow my way towards him. But the more I did so, the more the crowd seemed to thicken. I made to call his name, but my voice emerged as a faint and ludicrous squeak. Suddenly, I was in a different place. I was walking down a road. It was dusk, but I had an awareness of space, of something like open fields on either side. Ahead of me, I saw Julius, that distinctive walk of his, the way his thighs brushed together. I called, "Julius!" I wanted to ask him what he was doing there, but he continued to walk away, ambling slowly, and yet at the same time he seemed to be covering a great distance in a very short time. I ran, but he left me behind. And then what happened? Asks Adrian. Then I woke up, or dreamt I woke up. Later, when I woke up, my arm was numb. Then I knew I was really awake. The old man turns from Adrian to face the window. Outside, a second kite is caught on the razor wire. There is no breeze to speak of, and yet its wings of black plastic beat like the wings of a bird. This urge to order memories arrives with the age, a final sifting and sorting and cataloging, to leave things in order before we go. A pause. Back then, we were creatures of the air. Julius more than any of us. The dean telephoned me on the Saturday. He asked me to collect Safia and take her to the place where Johnson worked. I asked no questions, but did as I was told. We arrived full of hope Julius was being released, though Safia carried a small valise of his clean clothes. Insurance against over-optimism. Precisely how long we waited, I can't recall exactly. No sign of Johnson, whom I both expected to see and dreaded seeing. We waited on the third floor, where the desk clerk refused to accept the valise, which served to graft another layer upon our thin hopes. So we sat, staring at the gray scaffold walls. The clerk at the desk placed a package wrapped in brown paper upon the desk and called Safia to sign for it. She wrote her name down. Strange, what details you retain from such times. I remember her signature, or rather her lack of one. I'd never seen her handwriting before. Clear, legible, almost schoolgirlish, devoid of flourishness. Safia opened the package. It contained Julius's watch, his handkerchief, his wallet, a pair of bolts, a washer, and a heavy metal screw. Julius's worry beads, his asthma medication too. He was supposed to carry it everywhere with him, but often forgot. Too little a thing to fit in the scale of his imagination. By some blunder, we were led into the basement of the building, 3 flights of stairs and then another, along a corridor of gray-walled tunnel. There it was cool. A dampness hung in the air. The clerk opened the door to a room. With that innocence, we entered. Such innocence. We thought it was a waiting room, you see. I was talking. What was I saying? I think I was asking the clerk whether Johnson would be coming down. I stopped when Safia dropped the package and a screw skittered across the floor. I bent to retrieve it, chasing it with my fingers. When I straightened, Safia was on the other side of the room. I looked across and saw what she had seen. I walked towards her. Don't, for some reason that was the only thing I could think of to say. Don't, as though we could somehow walk out, close the door of that narrow room and turn our backs on what was inside, and in so doing prevent it from ever becoming real. She never heard me. She reached out her hand and pulled back the sheet. People, when they describe such life-changing moments, often say every action seems suddenly slowed. How true it is. The working of the brain. I expect struggling to embrace the enormity of the moment. Afterwards, you are left with fragments. The form lying on the trolley, Safia's hand over her mouth, Julius's face, his eyes half open, the pupils not dull but lucent, so that he appeared to be looking past us at the door, as if waiting for someone else to enter. Safia's hand on his cheek. No sound save the banging of my own heart. What a terrible stillness there is, once the heat and the light have left her body. The death mask, a look of sheer indifference to you, the living. Safia placed her hand on Julius's cheek, withdrew it and reeled backwards. Colliding with me, I tried and failed to hold her. Within the same motion, she fell suddenly forward, tore the sheet away from her husband's body, and pressed her forehead against his chest. She began to kiss his face. She begged him to wake up. With growing insistence, she kissed him and shook him by the shoulders. She straightened, her tears left upon Julius's face. She started to search his body. I could only imagine for some sign of what or who had done this to him. What the clerk was doing all this time, I have no idea. Did he say anything? Did he try to interfere? I think not. I imagine by then he had realized the scale of his error. At no time did I register him. I wonder now if I could even recall his face. Instead, I noticed that Julius was wearing the same clothes he had worn the night of the moon landing, and that now Safia was unbuttoning his shirt, pressing her face into his still powerful chest, murmuring, "Don't go there, please, my darling. It's too dark, too dark. Stay with me." She ran her fingertips over his naked stomach and chest, his collarbones, and down his arms. She held his hands in hers, felt his fingers and held them against her face. She bent over him and searched his sides, but there was nothing, no wound or bruise, fracture or burn. All that I remember, bright splinters, silence save for Safia's scaling, interrupted by a sudden commotion, footsteps in the corridor, Johnson shouting at the desk clerk, his attempts futile to cover Julius's face with the sheet. Safia's fury as she set herself upon Johnson, beating him with her fist, Johnson's composure gone. It pleased me, I admitted, to see him finally undone. There is a quality to grief, I know, like the first rains after the dry season. At first, it fails, slides off the soil, rolling away in the dust of disbelief. But each day brings fresh rain. Safia did what was expected of her. People came to pay respects, the women to sit with her, the men to offer gifts of money for the funeral, and for the 7 and 40 days ceremonies. I was there, assisting where I could. The Imam called. How that would have infuriated Julius. Safia sat among the women. She wore a gown of plain black cotton, her hair wrapped in a black headdress, no makeup, and not a single bangle, necklace, or ring, except her gold wedding band. She was beautiful. She would reward my efforts to help with an otherworldly smile. I say otherworldly, for since the moment in that grey building when Safia lifted the sheet from Julius's face, she had stepped into a landscape where nobody lived but her. The students began to return after the vacation, like birds assembling after a long migration, fluttering down in ones and twos, recognizing each other from the year before. That day, the one I'm thinking of, the dean called me into his office. I opened the door to find him at the window, from where he liked to survey his domain. Also, it seemed to me. Only this time, his attention seemed to be concentrated upon something of particular interest. "Come," he said, continuing to gaze from the window. I did as I was asked. "What's this?" I looked down. The courtyard was full of students, hundreds of them. They were all dressed in white, the boys in shirts and slacks, the girls in dresses. Some had covered their hair. It was hard to see what they were doing. If it was a demonstration of some sort, then where were the placards? "Go down and see what's going on," said the dean. I was due at Safia's house. Safia's house. How quickly I came to think of it as that. In a little under an hour, for it was the day of Julius's 40-day ceremony. I'd helped Safia with the arrangements, and I was reluctant to become involved in anything that might delay me. I allowed my gaze to drift over the heads of the gathered students. More and more of them were arriving all the time. For no reason, my eyes came to alight on a particular student, a boy, perhaps because he was sitting more or less alone on the library steps. There was something familiar in his profile. Even from this angle, I recognized him as the boy who had been with Julius the day I watched him from my own window. Lost so deep in conversation, they had stopped to continue their discourse and allowed themselves to be soaked by the rain. Shortly afterwards, Julius had bounded up to my office and asked me to lend him the price of a soft drink. I remembered it as if it were yesterday. Like everybody else, the boy was dressed in white. On his feet, a pair of white tennis shoes. He wore his hair high in the fashion of the times, a comb pushed into the front. What was that around his arm? I leaned forward and peered at him. It was a black armband. I switched my gaze to the student nearest him. He too wore a black armband. The girl he was talking to, she had a black scarf wrapped around her hair. Over there, the plump girl in the long skirt, a black sash, another armband, another, and another. "Excuse me," I said to the dean. He was standing with his arms folded, his eyebrows drawn together, his features arranged into an expression of general and indistinct annoyance. I remembered our telephone conversation that Saturday morning, the day he asked me to fetch Safia from her home and take her to Johnson's offices. On the phone, he had sounded irritated, as though annoyed at being woken at such an hour. And yet by then, he must have known what had happened. He must have known Julius was dead. Down in the courtyard, I moved in and out of the throng of students. I saw no other faculty members. One or two of the students greeted me. A nod here, a handshake there. A boy grasped my hand. I would not let it go. Instead, he hung his head and began to sob. At 2 o'clock, the library bell sounded, and there was a general movement, a shuffling as people began to shape themselves into some sort of order. I allowed myself to be carried along with them. By then, I knew exactly where they were going. Despite the atmosphere of morning, the somber day, and big-bellied clouds that floated above us, the humidity pressing in from all sides, there was something light in the air, and I felt inexplicably uplifted by it. It worried me not that the dean might be watching, waiting for me to report back to him. All of that I would deal with later. For now, I joined the march of students as we turned out of the gate and made our way along the tree-lined avenue towards the town. There was singing, as I recall, but not much. In the main, we walked in silence, 40 minutes, a minute for each day that had passed. Finally, we arrived, and those who could not find room in the house filled the garden, and those who could not find room in the garden stood in the street until the pink house on the hill was all but surrounded. Julius died of an asthma attack. This is the sum of what we were told. By the time he was discovered, it was too late. Nothing could be done to save him. His medication, it seemed, had been removed from his possession, along with other items of his personal effects. An error, unfortunate. In the room he was being held, in the basement of the building. Nobody had heard him dying.